Isaac Fletcher adjusted his bandana against the arid summer dust as he gazed across the sun-baked street of Coyote Springs. At 24, his lean frame had been hardened by 3 years of driving cattle across the unforgiving Texas landscape. The town's main street shimmered in the afternoon heat, the wooden buildings appearing to waver like mirages. His hazel eyes, ever vigilant, scanned the quiet thoroughfare from beneath the brim of his well-worn Stetson. "Sentiment gets men killed out here," Isaac muttered to himself, a mantra learned from bitter experience. 2 years ago, he'd watched his trail boss die helping a stranded family, ambushed by bandits who'd used the distressed travelers as bait. Since then, Isaac kept to himself, did his job, collected his pay, and trusted no one. The frontier demanded such caution. It was no place for tenderness or attachment. He'd ridden into Coyote Springs that morning, delivering a message to the ranch owner whose cattle he'd be helping drive north in 3 days' time. Now, with evening approaching, he had nothing but time and the promise of a hot meal at the town's only decent establishment, the Whiskey Barrel Saloon. As Isaac secured his bay gelding to the hitching post, he noticed a woman exiting the general store across the street. She stood out immediately, not dressed in the plain, practical garments of a frontier wife, but in a fitted blue dress that spoke of Eastern refinement. Her chestnut hair was pinned in a style too elegant for this dusty corner of Texas, with loose tendrils framing a face that made Isaac pause mid-motion. She couldn't have been more than 20, with a complexion that suggested she hadn't weathered many Western summers. She carried herself with purpose, chin high, seemingly oblivious to the admiring glances from the men loitering outside the saloon. In her arms, she clutched a paper-wrapped package, held protectively against her chest. "New schoolteacher," came a voice beside him. Isaac turned to find Sam Miller, the livery stable owner, leaning against a post. Miss Hope Randall, arrived on yesterday's stage from Boston, already got half the town talking. "Schoolteacher?" Isaac asked, his curiosity betraying him. "That's right, though some are wondering what a refined lady like that is doing in Coyote Springs. Town's barely got a proper school building," Sam chuckled. "My guess is she'll be heading back east before winter sets in." Isaac nodded, watching as Miss Randall disappeared into the milliner's shop. "Eastern ladies don't last long on the frontier," he agreed, pushing away an unexpected pang of interest. He'd be gone in a week anyway, back on the trail where he belonged. "She's staying at Widow Collins' boarding house if you're curious," Sam added with a knowing smile. "I'm not," Isaac replied firmly, turning toward the saloon, "just passing through." The whiskey barrel was half full, the usual mix of cowboys, miners, and town folk seeking respite from the day's heat. Isaac found a corner table and ordered a plate of beef stew from Mabel, the middle-aged waitress who'd been serving at the establishment since anyone could remember. "You with the Franklin outfit?" she asked as she set down his meal. Isaac nodded, breaking off a piece of cornbread, riding out with them day after tomorrow. "Heading up to Dodge." "That's the plan." Isaac kept his responses short, discouraging further conversation. Yet as he ate, his thoughts kept returning to the schoolteacher. Hope Randall. The name suited her somehow. There had been something in her countenance that spoke of optimism, of possibility. It was a quality seldom seen in frontier towns like Coyote Springs, where life had a way of grinding down even the most resilient spirits. After his meal, Isaac stepped out into the cooling evening air. The sunset painted the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the kind of beauty that occasionally made him question his solitary existence. As he stood contemplating the horizon, movement across the street caught his eye. Miss Randall was walking briskly along the boardwalk, no longer carrying her package. Instead, she clutched a small leather satchel, and her expression had changed. The confident poise had been replaced with something furtive, almost anxious. As she passed under the glow of a street lamp, Isaac could see her face more clearly. Her features were drawn with worry, her blue eyes darting occasionally over her shoulder. Isaac told himself it was none of his business. The schoolteacher's concerns were her own, and he'd be gone soon enough. Yet when she abruptly turned down the narrow alley between the Assier's office and the telegraph building, curiosity got the better of him. He waited a few moments, then crossed the street casually and paused at the mouth of the alley. In the gathering darkness, he could just make out her figure hurrying away. Something about her demeanor, the tension in her shoulders, the quick, purposeful stride spoke of more than an evening errand. "Fool," Isaac muttered to himself, even as he began to follow at a discreet distance. He kept to the shadows, maintaining enough space that she wouldn't detect his presence. The alley opened onto a less developed area of town, where the buildings were spaced farther apart and the road became little more than a dirt path. Miss Randall continued for another 100 yards before stopping in front of a small, whitewashed house set back from the road. A weathered sign beside the gate read Dr. Marcus Thornton, physician. The house was dark save for a single lamp burning in a back window. Isaac watched from behind a cottonwood tree as Miss Randall stood before the gate, seemingly hesitating. She glanced at a small timepiece she withdrew from her satchel, then at the house, before returning the watch to her bag. Whatever business she had with the doctor, she appeared to be early or perhaps uncertain. After a moment's deliberation, she pushed open the gate and approached the house, but instead of going to the front door, she circled around to the side. Isaac frowned, moving carefully to maintain sight of her. This was becoming stranger by the minute. The schoolteacher disappeared around the corner of the house. Isaac waited, expecting to hear a knock or the sound of a door opening. Instead, silence prevailed. Curiosity thoroughly piqued, he crept closer, staying low and quiet. When he reached the side of the house, he peered around cautiously. Miss Randall was nowhere to be seen. A window stood partially open, its curtain fluttering slightly in the evening breeze. With dawning comprehension, Isaac realized she must have climbed through. His first instinct was to walk away. Whatever the schoolteacher was up to, it wasn't his concern. Yet something held him there, whether it was genuine concern for her safety or simply the mystery of what would drive a respectable young woman to such actions, he couldn't say. The night deepened around him as he debated what to do. From within the house came the faint sound of movement, then a muffled thud followed by what might have been a stifled exclamation. That decided him. If Miss Randall was in trouble, he couldn't simply ride away. Isaac made his way to the window and peered inside. It opened into what appeared to be a study, dimly illuminated by the light of a single oil lamp turned low. Bookshelves lined the walls and a large desk dominated the center of the room. Miss Randall stood beside the desk, rifling through a drawer with quick, nervous movements. She was searching for something specific, that much was clear. Her earlier package was nowhere to be seen, but the leather satchel lay open on the desk, revealing several folded papers. As Isaac watched, she extracted a small key from the drawer and moved to a cabinet in the corner of the room. Before she could unlock it, a sound from elsewhere in the house froze her in place. Isaac tensed as well, hearing what she heard, the front door opening, followed by heavy footsteps in the hall. Miss Randall quickly closed the drawer and grabbed her satchel, looking frantically for a place to hide. The footsteps drew closer. In that moment, Isaac made a decision he would later question repeatedly. He tapped lightly on the window. Her head snapped toward the sound, eyes widening in alarm when she saw him. Isaac gestured urgently for her to come to the window. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, clearly weighing her limited options. Then, as the doorknob to the study began to turn, she lunged for the window. Isaac helped her climb out just as light flooded the room behind her. They crouched beneath the windowsill, hearts pounding, as Dr. Thornton entered his study. Through the partially open window, they could hear him moving about, muttering to himself. "Come on," Isaac whispered, tugging gently at her elbow. They crawled a short distance before rising into a crouch and hurrying away from the house, not stopping until they reached the shelter of a stand of trees 30 yards away. Only then did Hope Randall turn to face him, her expression a mixture of relief, fear, and indignation. "Who are you?" she demanded in a hushed voice. "And why were you following me?" Isaac raised his hand slightly, showing he meant no harm. "Isaac Fletcher, I'm a cowhand with the Franklin Ranch." He paused, realizing there was no good explanation for his actions. "I saw you looking troubled in town, then heading off alone at dusk. I thought you might be in danger." Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. "So you followed a woman you don't know to protect her?" The skepticism in her voice was palpable. "When you put it that way, it sounds worse than I intended," Isaac admitted. "But breaking into the doctor's house isn't exactly usual behavior for a schoolteacher, Miss Randall." Surprise flickered across her face. "You know who I am." "Small town," he explained with a shrug. "Word travels fast when a new schoolteacher arrives from Boston." She seemed to consider this, then glanced back toward the doctor's house. "We should move farther away." "If he realizes someone was in his study." Isaac nodded and they walked in silence until they reached the edge of town. The night had fully descended now, the stars bright overhead in the clear Texas sky. They stopped near the livery stable, well out of sight of the main street. "Thank you," Hope finally said, her voice softer, "for helping me get out of there, though I still don't understand why you were following me in the first place." Isaac studied her face in the moonlight. Up close, she was even more striking, her eyes a deep blue that reminded him of summer skies over the high plains. There was strength in her features, a determination that belied her youth. "I've been asking myself the same question," he admitted. "I'm usually not one to get involved in other people's business. Yet here we are." A hint of a smile touched her lips, though wariness remained in her eyes. "You must be curious about what I was doing." "It crossed my mind," Isaac replied dryly. Hope clutched her satchel tighter, conflict evident on her face. "I can't tell you everything, but I will say that Dr. Thornton isn't just a country physician. He's involved in something dangerous, something that's hurt people I care about." Isaac frowned. "Are you in some kind of trouble, Miss Randall?" "Not the kind you're thinking," she shook her head. "I'm not a criminal, Mr. Fletcher. I'm trying to stop one." She glanced around, as if suddenly aware of how exposed they were. "I should go. The widow will be wondering where I am." "At least let me walk you to the boarding house," Isaac offered, surprising himself, in case the doctor realized someone was in his study. After a moment's hesitation, Hope nodded. They walked in silence for a while, each lost in thought. The boarding house was on the north end of town, a two-story structure with a neat front porch and curtained windows glowing with lamplight. As they approached, Hope paused. "Thank you again, Mr. Fletcher. I'd appreciate if you didn't mention tonight's events to anyone." "I'm not one for gossip," Isaac assured her, "but whatever you're involved in, be careful. Coyote Springs might look quiet, but it has its dangers." "I'm aware," she replied, a hint of steel entering her voice. "More than you know." She started toward the house, then turned back. "How long will you be in town?" "3 days," Isaac answered, "then north with the herd to Kansas." Hope nodded, considering this information. "Good night, Mr. Fletcher." "Good night, Miss Randall." As he watched her ascend the steps to the boarding house, Isaac was struck by the certainty that he hadn't seen the last of the schoolteacher's mysterious activities. Against his better judgment, he found himself intrigued, not just by the puzzle she presented, but by Hope Randall herself. 3 days, he murmured, turning back toward the saloon where he'd rented a room. "And then I'm gone." He repeated the words like a promise to himself, even as he wondered why the prospect of leaving suddenly seemed less appealing than it had that morning. The following day dawned clear and hot, the kind of relentless Texas summer day that had men seeking shade by mid-morning. Isaac rose early and headed to the Franklin ranch to check on preparations for the cattle drive. The work was familiar and consuming, counting stock, inspecting equipment, reviewing the planned route north. Yet throughout the day, his thoughts kept returning to Hope Randall and her clandestine visit to the doctor's house. What could a Boston schoolteacher possibly want with whatever secrets Dr. Thornton kept? The question nagged at him as he worked, distracting him enough that Bill Harker, the trail boss, noticed. "Something on your mind, Fletcher?" the older man asked as they checked the chuck wagon supplies. "Just thinking about the drive," Isaac lied smoothly, "wondering about water along the eastern route." Harker seemed satisfied with this explanation, launching into a detailed discussion of the watering holes they'd encounter. Isaac was grateful for the distraction, forcing himself to focus on the practicalities of the journey ahead. It was late afternoon when he returned to town, dusty and tired. After stabling his horse, he headed to the bathhouse for a much-needed wash. Emerging clean and somewhat refreshed, he decided to get a proper meal at the hotel restaurant rather than the saloon. The Coyote Springs Hotel was the town's attempt at refinement, a 2-story building with actual glass windows and a dining room that served something closer to proper meals than the stew and beans available elsewhere. As Isaac entered, the cooling evening air followed him in, a welcome respite from the day's heat. The dining room was half full, mostly occupied by traveling salesmen and the town's more prosperous citizens. Isaac had just been seated at a corner table when the door opened again, and Hope Randall entered alongside an older woman he recognized as Widow Collins, the boarding house proprietress. Hope was dressed more simply today, in a blue calico dress appropriate for the frontier heat, her chestnut hair gathered in a practical knot at the nape of her neck. She scanned the room briefly, her gaze landing on Isaac. For a moment, recognition and something like alarm flashed across her face, before she composed herself and nodded slightly in acknowledgement. The widow and Hope were seated at a table across the room. Throughout the meal, Isaac found his attention drawn repeatedly to the schoolteacher. She conversed animatedly with her companion, smiling and gesturing in a way that suggested she was recounting some amusing tale. Nothing in her demeanor hinted at the woman who had broken into a doctor's study the previous night. As he finished his meal, a commotion at the entrance drew everyone's attention. Doctor. Marcus Thornton himself entered, accompanied by the town sheriff, Clayton Myers. The doctor was a tall man with silver-streaked dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He carried himself with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to respect. "Evening, Doc," the hotel proprietor called out. "Sheriff, table for two." "Just passing through, James," Sheriff Myers replied. "The doc here was telling me about some trouble at his place last night. Thought we'd ask around, see if anyone noticed anything unusual." Isaac carefully kept his expression neutral, though he couldn't help glancing toward Hope. She appeared completely composed, listening attentively as the widow commented on the news. "What kind of trouble?" someone asked. "Someone broke into my study," Dr. Thornton explained, his voice carrying the refined accent of an educated Easterner. "Nothing appears to have been stolen, but my papers were disturbed." "Most concerning." The sheriff nodded gravely. "If anyone saw someone suspicious around the doctor's residence last evening, I'd appreciate hearing about it." A murmur of concerned conversation rippled through the dining room. Isaac focused on finishing his coffee, avoiding looking at Hope again. When he finally risked a glance, he found her watching him, a silent question in her eyes. The doctor and sheriff moved through the room, speaking briefly with several diners. When they approached the widow's table, Isaac tensed slightly. "Mrs. Collins," Dr. Thornton greeted warmly. "And Miss Randall, our new schoolteacher. I don't believe we've been formally introduced yet. Marcus Thornton." Hope smiled politely, extending her hand. "Hope Randall, it's a pleasure to meet you, Doctor. I've heard you're quite respected in Coyote Springs." If the doctor recognized her voice or suspected her involvement in the previous night's intrusion, he gave no sign of it. "Most kind of you to say. I understand you've come all the way from Boston to take the teaching position here." "Yes, I was fortunate to secure the position," Hope replied. "Coyote Springs seems like a community that values education." "Indeed," the doctor agreed. "Though I imagine it's quite different from Boston. What brought you all the way to our little corner of Texas, if I may ask?" Isaac couldn't help but listen intently for her answer. "A desire for adventure, perhaps," Hope said with a light laugh, "and the opportunity to make a difference in a place where teachers are needed." Dr. Thornton nodded, seeming satisfied with this explanation. "Well, we're fortunate to have you. I should continue my inquiries with the sheriff, but I hope we'll have a chance for a proper conversation soon. Perhaps you might call at my office. I maintain a small library that might be of use for your teaching." "That would be wonderful," Hope replied. "Thank you for the offer." As the doctor and sheriff moved on, Isaac finished his meal and paid his bill. He nodded politely to Hope and the widow as he passed their table on his way out, receiving a cordial "Good evening, Mr. Fletcher" from Mrs. Collins and a more measured acknowledgement from Hope. Outside, the evening air had cooled pleasantly. Isaac had just started toward the saloon when he heard quick footsteps behind him. "Mr. Fletcher," Hope's voice was low and urgent. "A moment, please." He turned to find her standing a few paces away, glancing over her shoulder toward the hotel entrance. "I told Mrs. Collins I needed a breath of air," she explained quickly. "We don't have much time. I need to speak with you." Isaac gestured toward a quiet spot between buildings. "About last night, I assume." Once they were out of sight from the street, Hope spoke rapidly. "Dr. Thornton knows someone was in his study, but he doesn't know who." "I need to go back." "Go back?" Isaac stared at her incredulously. "That's madness. The sheriff's involved now." "Which is why I need your help," she pressed. "Tonight, after midnight when the town is asleep." Isaac shook his head. "Miss Randall, I'm leaving the day after tomorrow. Getting involved in whatever this is would be." "People's lives are at stake," she interrupted, her blue eyes intense in the fading light. "Including mine, potentially. I wouldn't ask if there were any other way." "What exactly are you looking for?" Isaac asked, curiosity getting the better of his caution. Hope hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Records, Doctor. Thornton is supplying adulterated medicines to several towns in the territory. Medicines that have killed at least 7 people that I know of, including my sister." The revelation hung in the air between them. Isaac studied her face, searching for signs of deception but finding only determination and grief. "Your sister?" he asked softly. Hope nodded, a flash of pain crossing her features. "Hannah, she was only 19. She took a tonic Thornton prescribed for her cough. It contained lethal amounts of morphine, far more than any legitimate medicine should. The same pattern has appeared in other towns where Thornton supplied medications. If that's true, why not take it to the authorities? Isaac asked. With what proof? Hope countered. I've been tracking him for months, gathering evidence, but I need the formula he's using, his supplier records, something concrete that can't be dismissed as coincidence or misuse. She glanced back toward the hotel. I have to go, Mrs. Collins will be wondering where I am. Isaac ran a hand through his hair, conflicted. Everything in him warned against getting involved. This was precisely the kind of entanglement he'd avoided since that fateful ambush 2 years ago. And yet the pain in Hope's eyes when she spoke of her sister seemed genuine. Midnight, he finally said, behind the livery stable, but I'm not promising anything beyond hearing your plan. Relief washed over Hope's face. Thank you. I'll be there. She turned to go, then paused. Mr. Fletcher, please be careful who you speak to before then. I don't know who else in town might be involved with Thornton. With that warning, she hurried back toward the hotel, leaving Isaac to wonder what he'd just committed himself to. As he continued toward the saloon, the doctor's words about Hope's reasons for coming to Coyote Springs echoed in his mind. A desire for adventure, she'd said, but revenge or justice seemed a more likely motivation. The saloon was busier than the previous night, filled with cowboys from various outfits preparing for upcoming drives. Isaac found a quiet corner and nursed a whiskey, listening to the conversations around him. Doctor. Thornton's break-in was a popular topic, with various theories being offered. Probably kids, suggested one weathered ranch hand, got nothing better to do than cause mischief. Or someone after laudanum, countered another. Heard there's been trouble with that in Meridian. Whatever it was, Sheriff Myers will sort it out, declared the bartender confidently. Not much happens in Coyote Springs that he doesn't get to the bottom of. Isaac kept his thoughts to himself, finishing his drink before heading upstairs to his rented room. Sleep proved elusive as he turned over Hope's accusations in his mind. If she was right about the doctor, then her crusade was justified. But if she was wrong, or worse, if she had some other motive, getting involved could cost him dearly. As midnight approached, Isaac made his decision. He would hear her out, maybe offer some advice, but maintain his distance from whatever scheme she was planning. The trail north awaited him, and with it, the solitude he'd come to rely on. The town was quiet when he slipped out of the saloon's back entrance and made his way to the livery stable. A nearly full moon cast silver light over the buildings, making the shadows deeper by contrast. Isaac kept to those shadows, moving silently through the familiar patterns of frontier caution. Hope was already waiting, a dark shawl draped over her hair and shoulders, making her nearly invisible against the stable wall. She stepped forward as he approached, relief evident in her posture. You came, she said softly. I said I would. Isaac glanced around, ensuring they were alone, but I still haven't agreed to help you break into the doctor's house again. Hope nodded. I understand, but I hope you'll reconsider once you hear my plan. It's actually safer with 2 people. Let's hear it then. She outlined her idea quickly and precisely, revealing a level of strategic thinking Isaac hadn't expected. The doctor would be attending a dinner at the mayor's house that evening, along with several other town notables, including the sheriff. The gathering would likely run late, giving them a window of opportunity to search his study more thoroughly. I've been watching his habits, Hope explained. He keeps his most important papers in a locked cabinet in his study, the one I was trying to open when you saw me. I found the key last night but didn't have time to use it. Tonight I'll open the cabinet while you keep watch. And if we're caught, Isaac asked. We won't be if we're careful, Hope insisted, but if something goes wrong, she hesitated. I have a letter with all my evidence and suspicions sealed in an envelope at the boarding house, addressed to a newspaper editor in St. Louis who's been investigating similar cases. If I disappear, it will be sent. The precaution revealed the seriousness of her undertaking and the danger she perceived. Isaac felt a reluctant admiration for her thoroughness. You've thought this through, he acknowledged. I've had months to plan, Hope replied, but I didn't anticipate how difficult it would be to access his records alone. She looked up at him, moonlight catching in her eyes. Will you help me, Mr. Fletcher? I can't let my sister's death and the others go unanswered. Isaac knew he should refuse. His instincts for self-preservation, honed by years on the frontier, screamed at him to walk away. Yet something in her quiet determination reached past his defenses, reminding him of the man he'd been before caution replaced compassion in his life. Isaac, he said finally. If we're going to risk arrest together, you might as well use my given name. Hope's smile was brief but genuine. Isaac then, and I'm Hope, not Miss Randall. One condition, Isaac added, if things go wrong we both leave. No heroics, no martyrdom. Your sister wouldn't want you to die seeking justice for her. Hope nodded slowly, agreed, though I pray it won't come to that. They finalized their plan, agreeing to meet at the doctor's house at 1:30, when the mayor's dinner would be well underway. As they prepared to go their separate ways, Hope impulsively reached out and squeezed Isaac's hand. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing me." The gesture, brief and unexpected, left Isaac strangely affected as he watched her disappear into the night. He realized that somewhere between their first encounter and now, he had indeed come to believe her, not just her story about the doctor, but her sincerity, her determination, her grief. It was a kind of trust he hadn't extended to anyone in a long time. This changes nothing, he told himself firmly as he returned to his room. In 2 days he would ride north with the herd, leaving Coyote Springs and its schoolteacher detective behind. Whatever happened tonight would be an anomaly, a brief deviation from the solitary path he'd chosen. Yet as he lay on his bed, waiting for the appointed hour, Isaac couldn't quite convince himself that he would emerge from this night unchanged. The moon had risen high by the time Isaac made his way toward Dr. Thornton's residence. The town was still, only the occasional light visible in windows where someone remained awake. From the direction of the mayor's house on the hill, the faint sounds of music and laughter confirmed that the dinner party was indeed in progress. Hope was waiting in the shadows near the doctor's gate, barely visible in her dark clothing. She nodded in acknowledgement as Isaac approached, then pointed toward the house. No lights inside. "I watched him leave for the mayor's an hour ago." "How do we get in?" Isaac asked quietly. "Same window as before." Hope shook her head. "Too risky, he might have secured it. There's a back door that leads to the kitchen. I noticed yesterday it has a simple latch lock." They circled the house cautiously, staying close to the shadows. The back door was indeed simpler than the front, with an old-fashioned latch mechanism. Isaac examined it briefly, then produced a small knife from his boot. "Stand watch," he murmured, working the blade between the door and frame. After a moment of careful manipulation, the latch gave way with a soft click. The kitchen was dark and still, smelling faintly of coffee and tobacco. They moved quietly through it to a narrow hallway, guided by the weak moonlight filtering through small windows. Hope led the way, evidently having memorized the house's layout during her previous intrusion. The study door was closed but unlocked. Hope paused before opening it, extracting a small candle and matches from her pocket. "We'll need light," she whispered. "But we'll keep it low and away from the windows." Inside, the study looked much as Isaac remembered from his brief glimpse the night before: bookshelves, a large desk, and the cabinet Hope had been attempting to access. She lit the candle, keeping the flame shielded with her hand as she moved directly to the desk. "Keep watch at the door," she instructed, setting the candle on the desk and opening the top drawer. "This should only take a few minutes." Isaac positioned himself near the doorway, where he could see both the hall and Hope's activities. She worked methodically, finding the key exactly where she'd seen it the previous night, then moving to the cabinet. The lock turned with a soft scrape of metal. Hope opened the cabinet doors to reveal shelves of neatly labeled folders and bottles. She quickly began examining them, holding pages close to the candle to read in the dim light. "Anything?" Isaac asked after several tense minutes had passed. "Yes," Hope replied, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Records of compound formulas, invoices from a chemical supply house in St. Louis," she turned to look at him, face pale in the candlelight, "and a ledger of payments, bribes to officials in several towns, including your Sheriff Myers." The revelation hung heavily in the air. If the local law enforcement was involved, Hope's quest for justice had just become significantly more complicated and dangerous. "Take what you need," Isaac urged quietly. "We should go." Hope nodded, selecting several pages and carefully placing them in a pocket sewn into her skirt. She was about to close the cabinet when she froze, her attention caught by something on a lower shelf. "What is it?" Isaac asked, tensing at her sudden stillness. "Bottles," Hope whispered, reaching for one, labeled with names and dates. She held it up to the candlelight, reading the handwritten label. "Sarah Abernathy, February 12, 1883, her voice caught. "That's one of the women who died in Meridian." "Evidence he kept the contaminated medicines," Isaac guessed. More than that, Hope replied, her expression hardening. Proof of intent, these aren't just mislabeled or carelessly prepared. There, she hesitated, struggling for words. They're experiments. He's been systematically testing different formulas, tracking the results. The enormity of the accusation made Isaac's blood run cold. You're saying he's deliberately poisoning people? Before Hope could answer, a distant sound made them both freeze, the front door opening, followed by footsteps in the entrance hall. Blow out the candle, Isaac hissed, drawing his revolver. Hope quickly extinguished the flame, plunging the room into darkness. In the sudden silence, they could hear a man's voice, the doctor's, speaking to someone. Appreciate you escorting me home, Sheriff, but it wasn't necessary. Nonsense, Doc, came the reply, Sheriff Myers. With someone breaking in just last night, can't be too careful. Isaac met Hope's eyes in the darkness, reading the same alarm he felt. They were trapped, with the doctor and the potentially corrupt sheriff between them and the exit. Isaac gestured urgently toward the window, their only escape route. Hope nodded, but before moving toward it, she quickly grabbed two of the labeled bottles, securing them alongside the papers in her hidden pocket. Then she followed Isaac to the window, which he carefully eased open. The voices grew closer, the men were approaching the study. Isaac helped Hope through the window first, then followed swiftly. They had just cleared the sill when light flooded the room behind them as the door opened. Stay low, Isaac breathed, pulling Hope into a crouch beneath the window. They began inching away from the house, keeping close to the ground. What the hell? The sheriff's voice came from inside, sharp with surprise. The window's open. It was secured this morning, Doctor. Thornton replied, alarm evident in his tone. I checked it myself. The sound of rapid footsteps approaching the window galvanized them into action. Abandoning stealth for speed, Isaac grabbed Hope's hand and they ran, staying close to the shadows of nearby buildings. Behind them, a shout confirmed they'd been spotted. Someone's out there, stop right there. The command was followed by the unmistakable sound of a revolver being cocked. Isaac pulled Hope behind the cover of a water trough just as a shot rang out, the bullet splintering wood inches above their heads. This way, Isaac urged, leading her toward the darker edges of town where buildings gave way to scattered trees and underbrush. They ran in earnest now, no longer attempting to hide their flight. Behind them, voices called out in alarm and more shots followed. The sheriff was alerting the town, rousing others to the pursuit. Isaac knew their only advantage was knowledge of where they were going, and at the moment he had no destination beyond away. They reached the edge of town, breathing hard from the sprint. Hope clutched at her side, but her eyes were clear and focused. The livery, Isaac decided, if we can get to the horses. Hope nodded and they changed direction, circling back through the trees toward the stable. As they moved, Isaac tried to assess their situation. If the sheriff was indeed corrupt, as Hope's discovery suggested, they couldn't expect fair treatment if caught. The evidence she carried would never make it to any official channels. The livery stable was dark and quiet when they reached it, its owner presumably awakened by the commotion but gone to investigate. Isaac led Hope to the rear entrance, usually left unlocked for early departing riders. Inside, the familiar smells of hay and horses greeted them. Isaac quickly located his bay gelding while Hope stood anxiously by the door. They're searching the main street, she reported in a hushed voice. But they'll check here soon enough. Isaac nodded grimly as he saddled his horse with practiced efficiency. Can you ride? Yes, Hope affirmed, but we can't steal one of these horses. The owners would be ruined. We're not stealing, Isaac clarified, just borrowing. I'll leave payment. He reached into his pocket and extracted a handful of coins, placing them on a nearby shelf along with a hastily scrawled note. Then he moved to a stall housing a sturdy chestnut mare he recognized as belonging to the general store owner, who rarely used the animal. Hope helped as best she could, her movements betraying some familiarity with horses, though not the practiced ease of someone raised around them. Within minutes, both mounts were ready. Where will we go? Hope asked as Isaac led the horses toward the back door. North, initially, he replied, then east toward Dallas once we're clear. You'll find more sympathetic ears for your evidence in a larger city. They mounted up in the shelter of the stable's shadow, then guided the horses at a walk until they were safely beyond the immediate outskirts of town. Only then did Isaac signal for a faster pace, urging the animals into a steady trot that ate up the distance without exhausting them. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit gradually faded. The moon provided enough light to navigate, illuminating the rolling terrain of scrub and scattered trees. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, putting several miles between themselves and Coyote Springs before Isaac finally slowed to give the horses a rest. They dismounted beside a small stream, allowing the animals to drink while they caught their breath and assessed their situation. "Do you think they'll follow us this far?" Hope asked, pushing a strand of hair from her face. The night ride had loosened her careful arrangement, giving her a wilder appearance that suited the circumstances. "Eventually," Isaac answered honestly. "Once they realize we're not hiding in town, the sheriff will probably organize a proper search party at first light." Hope nodded, her expression resolute despite the fatigue evident in the slump of her shoulders. "Then we should keep moving." She reached into her pocket, extracting one of the bottles she'd taken. In the moonlight, the glass gleamed dully. "It was worth it. With this and the papers, I can prove what Thornton has been doing." Isaac studied her face, struck by the determination that seemed to override her fear. "Your sister must have been quite a woman to inspire such loyalty." A sad smile touched Hope's lips. "Hannah was everything I'm not: gentle, patient, trusting. She never saw the darkness in people." She carefully returned the bottle to her pocket. "When she got sick, she believed Dr. Thornton would help her. She trusted him completely." "And you've been tracking him since her death?" Hope nodded. It took months to connect the patterns. Other deaths in other towns where he'd previously practiced, always dismissed as unfortunate reactions or patient misuse of medicine. But when I found a letter from Hannah describing the exact symptoms the others experienced. "How did you end up in Coyote Springs?" Isaac asked. "Was the teaching position just a cover?" "Both a cover and a necessity," Hope admitted. "I needed to be close to Thornton to find proof. The position was genuinely open, and I do have teaching experience." "I didn't lie about that." The honesty in her explanation reassured Isaac. Whatever else Hope Randall might be, she wasn't a practiced deceiver. Her quest was exactly what she claimed, a sister seeking justice for a terrible wrong. "We should keep moving," he said after the horses had rested. "There's a line shack about 10 miles north that the Franklin outfit uses during roundups. We can stop there until dawn, decide our next move." As they continued their journey through the night, Isaac found himself considering options he would have dismissed as foolish just days earlier. The cattle drive north would have to proceed without him. Bill Harker would find another hand easily enough. Instead, Isaac would escort Hope to Dallas, ensure her evidence reached the proper authorities. Then, what? The question hung in his mind, unanswered as they rode through the moonlit Texas night. For 2 years, Isaac had lived by a simple creed: trust no one, depend only on yourself, avoid attachments that could become vulnerabilities. Yet here he was, risking everything for a woman he barely knew, because something in her courage and conviction had awakened a part of himself he'd thought safely buried. The line shack appeared as a dark silhouette against the pre-dawn sky, a simple one-room structure built to shelter cowboys during the worst weather. It was crude but solid, with a stone fireplace and enough space for several men to sleep comfortably. They approached cautiously, Isaac circling the building once to ensure it was unoccupied before leading the horses to a small corral attached to one side. After settling the animals with water from a nearby spring and hay stored in a lean-to, they finally entered the shack. The interior was basic: a rough table with 2 chairs, several bunks built into the walls, and a fireplace with cooking implements hanging beside it. Isaac lit a lantern hanging from a ceiling beam, illuminating the space with a warm glow. "It's not much," he acknowledged, watching Hope take in their surroundings. "It's perfect," she replied, sinking gratefully onto one of the chairs. "Safe, at least for now." Isaac built a small fire, more for comfort than warmth in the mild night. They had no food beyond a few strips of jerky Isaac carried in his saddlebags, but neither felt particularly hungry. The events of the night had left them drained yet alert, aware that their respite was temporary. As the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, Hope spread the documents she'd taken on the table, examining them in the combined light of the fire and lantern. Isaac watched as she sorted through them, her face growing increasingly grim. "It's worse than I thought," she finally said, looking up at him. "Thornton has been systematically testing different compounds, recording dosages and effects. The bottles are labeled with victims' names, dates, and outcomes." She pushed a paper toward him. "And this ledger shows payments to officials in at least 4 towns, including Sheriff Myers." Isaac examined the page, recognizing the sheriff's name among several others, each with amounts and dates noted beside them. "Bribes to look the other way. Or to actively protect him," Hope suggested. Either way, it explains why no one has connected the deaths before. What was his motive? Isaac asked, struggling to comprehend the methodical evil the documents revealed. Why risk his position, his freedom, to poison strangers? Hope shook her head slowly. I'm not sure. There are references in his notes to advancing medical knowledge and necessary sacrifices for progress. He seems to view himself as a researcher, not a murderer. A researcher doesn't need bribes or secrecy, Isaac pointed out. Whatever his justification, he knew what he was doing was wrong. They fell silent, contemplating the evidence spread before them. Outside, birds began their morning songs, oblivious to the human drama unfolding in the small shack. We should rest while we can, Isaac finally suggested. It's a long ride to Dallas, and we'll want to travel after dark to avoid search parties. Hope nodded, gathering the papers carefully and returning them to her pocket. There were 2 bunks on opposite walls of the shack. Isaac indicated she should take one while he settled into a chair near the door, his revolver within easy reach. You need sleep too, Hope protested. I'll rest, Isaac assured her, but someone should keep watch just in case. Hope seemed about to argue further, then relented, recognizing the wisdom in his caution. She removed her shoes and lay down on one of the bunks, pulling a rough blanket over herself. Despite her exhaustion, she seemed reluctant to close her eyes. Isaac, she said softly after a moment, what happens after Dallas? After I deliver the evidence. The question echoed his own earlier thoughts. That depends on how it's received, he answered honestly. If the authorities take action against Thornton and his accomplices, you might be free to return to your life. If not, there is no my life to return to, Hope admitted. I gave up everything to find justice for Hannah, my teaching position in Boston, my friends, what little family we had left. She turned to look at him directly. What about you? Will you still head north with the cattle drive? Isaac considered the question, realizing he no longer knew the answer. 2 days ago, his course had seemed clear. Now nothing was certain except the woman across the room and the danger they faced together. One thing at a time, he said finally. First, we get to Dallas safely, then we can both decide what comes next. Hope seemed satisfied with this non-answer, closing her eyes at last. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened into sleep, the tensions of their ordeal momentarily eased from her face. In repose, she looked younger, the determined crusader replaced by a vulnerable young woman far from home and everything familiar. Isaac maintained his vigil by the door, listening to the awakening day outside while his thoughts wandered. The cattle drive would leave tomorrow without him. Bill Harker would be angry, but he'd manage, trail bosses always did. What Isaac couldn't predict was what would follow for himself. The solitary trail north had been his plan, his expectation, his safety. Now an entirely different path beckoned, one that included a brave, stubborn schoolteacher with chestnut hair and a cause worth fighting for. One thing at a time, he repeated silently to himself, settling more comfortably in the chair. For now, that would have to be enough. The day passed slowly in the confines of the lined shack. Isaac dozed intermittently, alert to any sounds that might signal approach. Around midday, Hope awoke and insisted on taking a turn at watch while he got proper rest. Too exhausted to argue effectively, Isaac accepted the compromise, stretching out on the vacant bunk while Hope sat by the window, one of Thornton's documents in her hand. Wake me if you hear anything, he instructed. Anything at all. I will, she promised. Sleep now, you've earned it. Despite his intention to remain partially alert, Isaac fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. When he woke, the quality of light through the windows told him it was late afternoon. Hope was still at her post, though she'd moved to the door, which stood partially open to admit the fresher air. Any sign of pursuit? Isaac asked, sitting up. Hope shook her head. Nothing, just birds and the occasional rabbit, she smiled slightly. I was beginning to think you might sleep straight through till nightfall. How long was I out? He ran a hand through his hair, feeling somewhat restored despite the circumstances. About 5 hours, Hope replied. You needed it. Isaac nodded, acknowledging the truth of her assessment. He joined her at the door, surveying the surrounding landscape. The line shack stood in a small depression, partially sheltered by a rise to the south, the direction of Coyote Springs. It would be difficult for anyone to approach unseen during daylight. We should leave at dusk, he suggested. Ride through the night and put as much distance between us and the search parties as possible. Hope agreed, and they spent the remaining daylight preparing for the journey. Isaac checked and rechecked the horses, ensuring they were rested and ready for another long ride. Hope organized the evidence she'd gathered, securing it so it wouldn't be lost during their flight. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, they prepared to depart. Isaac had just finished saddling the horses when a sound caught his attention, the distant but unmistakable rhythm of approaching hoofbeats. "Someone's coming," he warned, drawing Hope away from the door and back into the shack. "Multiple riders from the south." Hope's face paled but her voice remained steady. "The sheriff." "Most likely," Isaac confirmed, peering carefully through the window. "Get your things. We'll try to slip out the back, circle around to the east." They worked quickly, gathering their meager possessions. Isaac slung his saddlebags over his shoulder and checked his revolver one final time. Hope tucked the precious documents securely inside her bodice, where they wouldn't be easily found or lost. "Ready?" Isaac asked, receiving a determined nod in response. They had just reached the back door when the riders came into view, 6 men, including Sheriff Myers and Dr. Thornton. The search party approached cautiously, having spotted the horses in the corral. "Too late for a clean escape," Isaac muttered, calculating rapidly. "We'll have to make a stand or surrender." "Not surrender," Hope said firmly, "not with what we know about the sheriff." Isaac nodded grimly, understanding her fear. If Myers was involved in Thornton's scheme, their evidence would never see the light of day, and they themselves might not survive to tell the tale. "Stay here," he instructed, moving toward the front of the shack. "I'll try to hold them off, buy you time to slip away with the horses." Hope caught his arm. "That's suicide, there are 6 of them." "Better than both of us being caught," Isaac insisted. "You have the evidence, it needs to reach Dallas." Before she could protest further, a voice called from outside. "Fletcher, Miss Randall, we know you're in there. Come out now and no one needs to get hurt." It was Sheriff Myers, his tone carrying the false reasonableness of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Isaac moved to the window, keeping himself concealed while observing the riders. They had spread out surrounding the shack at a cautious distance. "What now?" Hope whispered, joining him at the window. Before Isaac could answer, Dr. Thornton urged his horse forward a few paces. "Miss Randall," he called. "I understand you may have misinterpreted some of my research. If you'll just come out and talk, I'm sure we can clear up this unfortunate misunderstanding." The casual confidence in his voice made Isaac's blood boil. The man sounded genuinely puzzled that anyone would question his actions, as if the documented deaths were mere inconveniences rather than lives destroyed. "Research," Hope whispered incredulously. "He's calling murder research." "Keep him talking," Isaac suggested suddenly. "If we can get them to dismount, separate a bit." Hope understood immediately. "We might have a chance to break through." She moved closer to the door, though still out of sight. "Dr. Thornton," she called, "I've read your notes. I've seen the bottles labeled with victims' names, including my sister Hannah." A moment of silence followed this revelation. When Thornton spoke again, his voice had lost some of its polish. "Your sister? I don't recall treating anyone named Hannah Randall." "Hannah Randall Reed," Hope corrected, emotion creeping into her voice despite her best efforts. "Innocent. Louis, February of last year. She took your restorative tonic for a chest cold. It killed her within hours." Another silence, longer this time. Isaac watched as Thornton conferred briefly with the sheriff, their expressions tight with concern. "Miss Randall," Thornton finally responded, "medical treatments sometimes have unexpected outcomes. Patients react differently. It's regrettable that your sister had a negative reaction, but it was hardly murder." "And the others," Hope challenged. "Sarah Abernathy in Meridian, Thomas Cole in Fairfield, all coincidences." "Enough," Sheriff Myers interjected sharply. "This isn't a trial and you're not a judge. You broke into the doctor's home, stole private property, and fled from lawful authority. Come out now or we'll come in and get you." Isaac met Hope's eyes, reading the fear and determination there. "Get ready," he murmured. "When I give the signal, run for the horses, don't stop for anything." Hope nodded, though her expression suggested she had no intention of leaving him behind. Outside, the sheriff was losing patience. "Last chance, Fletcher, you too, Miss Randall. Count of 5, then we're coming in." Isaac positioned himself by the door, revolver ready. The plan, such as it was, depended on creating enough confusion to reach the horses. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. "1," the sheriff called. "Hope," Isaac said quietly. "Whatever happens, get that evidence to Dallas." "2. We'll both get there," Hope insisted. 3. Isaac took a deep breath, steadying himself. 4. The count was interrupted by the unmistakable sound of multiple riders approaching rapidly from the north, the opposite direction from Coyote Springs. Sheriff Myers and his men turned in alarm, hands moving to their weapons. "What the hell?" one of the deputies exclaimed. From their vantage point inside, Isaac and Hope watched as a group of at least a dozen riders appeared over the rise, approaching at a controlled gallop. They flew no flag or identification, but their disciplined formation suggested military training. Texas Rangers. Hope whispered hopefully. Isaac shook his head, not likely this far from any major settlement. He studied the newcomers more carefully as they drew closer. No, those are Franklin men, that's Bill Harker in front. Hope looked confused. The cattle drive, but why would they? Fletcher Harker's voice boomed across the distance. You in there, boy. Isaac stepped cautiously to the doorway, keeping his revolver ready but visible. I'm here, Bill. The Franklin riders came to a halt about 50 yards from the shack, forming a loose semicircle that effectively blocked the sheriff's group from advancing. Harker, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard, raised a hand in greeting. Heard there was some trouble in town, he called. Something about you and the new schoolteacher fleeing in the night. There's been a misunderstanding, Sheriff Myers interjected, clearly unhappy with this new development. Fletcher and Miss Randall are wanted for questioning about a break-in. Harker turned his attention to the lawman, his expression unimpressed. Is that right? Must be serious to bring the sheriff and the town doctor out this far. He glanced at his men, who had spread out slightly, their positions casual but their hands near their weapons. Seems like an awful lot of fuss over a misunderstanding. The standoff was clear. The Franklin outfit outnumbered the sheriff's party 2-1, and every man among them was trail-hardened and well-armed. Whatever story had reached Harker's ears, he'd chosen to side with Isaac. This isn't your concern, Harker, Myers warned. Don't interfere with lawful business. Lawful is it? Harker scratched his beard thoughtfully. Strange. I got word from a reliable source that something not quite lawful was happening in Coyote Springs, something involving tainted medicines and dead folks in other towns. He fixed the sheriff with a hard stare. And some interesting payments to keep it quiet. Myers' face darkened with anger while Dr. Thornton visibly paled. Isaac and Hope exchanged a glance, wondering who could have sent such a message. Miss Randall, Harker continued, I believe you have some evidence that might interest certain authorities in Austin. Evidence about Dr. Thornton's medical practices. Hope stepped forward to stand beside Isaac in the doorway. I do, she confirmed, her voice carrying clearly despite her fatigue. Documentation of deliberately adulterated medicines, resulting in at least 7 deaths that I've traced, and financial records showing payments to officials, including Sheriff Myers, to prevent investigation. One of the deputies shifted uncomfortably in his saddle, looking at Myers with new suspicion. The sheriff noticed and scowled. These are serious accusations, Harker observed, the kind that should be heard by a proper court, not settled out here with guns. He turned to his men. Boys, I think we ought to escort Miss Randall and Fletcher to Austin. Let the Rangers sort this out. The Franklin cowboys murmured in agreement, several shifting their horses to more strategic positions. The message was unmistakable. They were prepared to ensure Hope and Isaac's safe passage, by force if necessary. Sheriff Myers recognized the changing dynamics. Outnumbered and with at least one of his own deputies now wavering, his position was rapidly deteriorating. This isn't over, he warned, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. I believe it is, Sheriff, Harker replied evenly. At least for today, you and your men might want to head back to town now. For a tense moment, it seemed Myers might resist. Then Dr. Thornton, evidently reading the situation more clearly, touched the lawman's arm. Another time, Sheriff, he said quietly, we know where to find them. With visible reluctance, Myers signaled his men to withdraw. They turned their horses and began riding south, the doctor among them. Only Myers himself lingered a moment longer, his gaze fixing on Hope with undisguised malice. This isn't the end of it, Miss Randall, he stated flatly. Then he too turned and rode away, following his men toward Coyote Springs. Only when they had disappeared from sight did Harker and his cowboys approach the line shack. Isaac and Hope stepped fully outside, relief and confusion mingling in their expressions. How did you know? Isaac asked as Harker dismounted. The trail boss grinned. Got a visitor late last night at camp, Mrs. Collins, the widow who runs the boarding house. Said she'd overheard the doctor and sheriff talking after you two fled. Figured you might need some help, he nodded respectfully to Hope. She also mentioned you'd been asking questions about suspicious deaths in other towns, miss. Said your sister was one of them. Mrs. Collins, Hope looked stunned. But she never gave any indication she knew what I was doing. Seems she's sharper than folks give her credit for, Harker replied. Said she lost a cousin to one of Thornton's tonics last year, but never connected it until she heard you two arguing with the doctor last night. He turned back to Isaac. She rode all the way out to our camp to tell me. Figured I wouldn't want to lose a good hand to a corrupt sheriff. Isaac shook his head, amazed at the unexpected alliance. I thought I'd be riding out with the herd tomorrow. Still can if you want, Harker offered, but I'm thinking you and Miss Randall might have more important business in Austin first. He looked between them, his expression becoming more serious. That evidence needs to reach the proper authorities. Thornton's been practicing in these parts for 3 years. No telling how many more have died from his medicines that we don't know about. Hope stepped forward, extending her hand to the trail boss. Thank you, Mr. Harker. Without your intervention, I'm not sure we would have made it out of here. Harker took her hand gently. No thanks needed, miss. My own mother was partial to doctor's tonics. Makes my blood run cold thinking she might have taken something like what you're describing. He released her hand and turned to his men. All right, boys, let's make camp. Tomorrow we'll split up. Most of you continue north with the herd as planned. Johnson, Perez, Rivera, and I will escort Fletcher and Miss Randall to Austin. As the cowboys dismounted and began setting up a perimeter around the line shack, Isaac found himself standing beside Hope, watching the unexpected allies who had come to their rescue. I never expected this, Hope said softly. I thought we were alone. So did I, Isaac admitted. He turned to look at her, seeing the exhaustion and relief mingling in her features. But I'm beginning to think that's the problem, believing we have to face everything alone. Hope met his gaze, understanding passing between them. The frontier teaches self-reliance. It's necessary for survival. Maybe, Isaac conceded. But today proved there's more to survival than just looking out for yourself. He hesitated, then added, your sister knew that, I think. Trusting others isn't always a weakness. Hope's eyes brightened with unexpected tears. No, she agreed, sometimes it's the only strength that matters. As the cowboys bustled around them, setting up the camp with practiced efficiency, Isaac felt something shift inside himself, a long-held conviction beginning to crack. The belief that had guided him for years, that attachment was dangerous, that the frontier demanded isolation, suddenly seemed less certain in the face of what had transpired. Hope Randall had risked everything for justice, for love of her sister. And now, a widow he barely knew had ridden miles in the dark to summon help, and a dozen cowboys had changed their plans to protect 2 people against corruption. These weren't acts of naivety or foolishness. They were acts of courage that acknowledged the connections between people as a source of strength, not vulnerability. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, Isaac realized his world had expanded beyond the solitary trail he'd planned to ride. Whatever came next in Austin and beyond, he would no longer be facing it alone. The journey to Austin took 4 days, traveling at a steady pace that wouldn't exhaust the horses. Harker and his 3 chosen men formed a protective escort, their presence deterring any potential pursuit from Coyote Springs. Each night around the campfire, Hope shared more details of her investigation, the pattern of deaths that had led her to Dr. Thornton and her personal quest for justice. My sister was only 19, she told them on the second night, the firelight casting shadows across her face. She'd just become engaged. Her fiancé found her when he came to call, too late to save her. The cowboys listened in respectful silence, their weathered faces somber. These were men accustomed to frontier hardship, to the constant presence of death in a harsh land, yet the deliberate nature of Thornton's actions struck them as particularly abhorrent. Man like that deserves hanging, Perez commented quietly, a sentiment the others nodded agreement to. He'll face justice, Harker assured them. The Rangers don't take kindly to someone poisoning folks for sport, especially not when lawmen are being paid to look the other way. Throughout the journey, Isaac found himself drawn increasingly to Hope's side, their shared ordeal creating a bond that deepened with each passing day. He admired her resilience, her unwavering commitment to her cause despite the dangers and difficulties. In quiet moments when the others were occupied with camp duties, they spoke of their lives before their paths had crossed. I always wanted to be a real teacher, Hope confessed as they walked beside a small stream, gathering water for the camp. Not just as a cover for investigation, there's something wonderful about opening young minds to new ideas, watching them discover the world. You still can be, Isaac pointed out. Once this is finished. Hope smiled sadly. Perhaps, but I'm not sure I'll ever feel the same about it. This past year has changed me. Isaac understood all too well. Life on the frontier tends to do that, show you sides of yourself you never knew existed. He paused, then added, not always for the worse, though. She looked at him curiously. What do you mean? Isaac considered how to explain the shift he'd felt since meeting her. 2 years ago, I watched good men die because they stopped to help strangers. I decided then that survival meant staying detached, trusting no one. He met her gaze directly. Following you to the doctor's house that night was the first time I'd broken that rule. And do you regret it? Hope asked softly. No, Isaac replied without hesitation. Even with everything that's happened since, I don't regret it at all. The admission hung between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to address. Yet something had undeniably changed in Isaac's worldview, a rigid certainty giving way to new possibilities. As they neared Austin, the landscape gradually transformed, the isolated frontier giving way to more settled country. Farms appeared with increasing frequency, and the road became better maintained. On the afternoon of the fourth day, the city itself came into view, its buildings rising from the plains in a display of civilization that seemed almost foreign after days on the trail. Austin in 1883 was a growing capital, bustling with commerce and political activity. The presence of the Texas Rangers headquarters made it the natural destination for Hope's evidence. Upon arrival, Harker led them directly to the Rangers' offices, using his standing as a respected rancher to secure an immediate meeting with Captain James Reed. The captain, a stern-faced man with piercing eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, listened attentively as Hope presented her case, laying out the documents and medicine samples she'd risked so much to obtain. Isaac stood beside her, adding his own observations about Sheriff Meyer's involvement and the confrontation at the line shack. When they had finished, Reed examined the evidence carefully before looking up at them with grim satisfaction. Miss Randall, Mr. Fletcher, you've done the state of Texas a great service, he stated formally. We've had reports of suspicious deaths in several towns, but nothing concrete to connect them until now. He tapped the ledger containing the payment records. And evidence of corruption among law enforcement is something the Rangers take very personally. What happens now, Captain? Hope asked. Now, Reed replied, we issue warrants for Dr. Thornton and Sheriff Myers, along with any other officials implicated in these records. I'll dispatch Rangers to Coyote Springs immediately. He paused, his expression softening slightly. I understand this has been a personal quest for you, Miss Randall. Your sister's death won't go unanswered. Hope nodded, unable to speak as emotion welled up at this official acknowledgement of her long pursuit. Isaac placed a supportive hand on her shoulder, feeling her trembling slightly beneath his touch. You'll both need to remain in Austin for a time, the captain continued. There will be formal statements to take, and you may be required to testify once the accused are apprehended. We understand, Isaac assured him, speaking for them both. After completing the necessary paperwork and surrendering the evidence into official custody, they emerged from the Rangers' headquarters into the late afternoon sunlight. Harker and his men were waiting, having seen to the horses and secured rooms at a nearby hotel. All taken care of? The trail boss asked. Yes, Hope confirmed. Captain Reed is sending Rangers to Coyote Springs tonight. He seemed confident they'll apprehend Thornton and the sheriff quickly. Harker nodded approvingly. Good, justice moves faster when the Rangers are involved. He glanced between Hope and Isaac, a knowing look in his eyes. Well, my boys and I need to catch up with the herd. They've got a 2-day head start on us already. Isaac felt a momentary confusion. The cattle drive had been his plan, his purpose before all this began. Now, with Hope standing beside him and the prospect of remaining in Austin for the foreseeable future, the trail north seemed strangely distant, as if it belonged to another life entirely. He began, not entirely sure what he intended to say. Harker waved him off with a knowing smile. Save it, Fletcher. I've already hired another hand in Coyote Springs to replace you. Something told me you might be finding a different trail to follow. He extended his hand. You're a good cowhand, but I think you found something more important than pushing cows to Kansas. Isaac shook the offered hand, grateful for the older man's understanding. Thank you for everything. After saying their goodbyes to Harker and his men, Isaac and Hope were left standing in the busy street, suddenly aware that for the first time in days, they were truly alone together, without the immediate pressure of pursuit or the protective presence of their escorts. Well, Isaac said after a moment, I believe the captain mentioned a hotel. Hope nodded, looking somewhat lost now that her long quest had been placed in official hands. Yes, just down the street. The Drovers' Rest, I think he said. They walked in companionable silence, both processing the events that had brought them to this point. The hotel proved to be a modest but clean establishment catering primarily to cattle buyers and other business travelers. With funds provided by the Rangers for their stay, they secured adjacent rooms on the second floor. Would you care for dinner? Isaac asked as they stood in the hallway between their rooms. I imagine it's been a while since you've had a proper meal in a dining room. Hope smiled, some of the tension easing from her features. That sounds wonderful. Just give me a few minutes to freshen up. In his room, Isaac removed his trail dust as best he could with the basin of water provided. Studying his reflection in the small mirror, he noted the stubble on his jaw and the weariness in his eyes. Yet beneath the fatigue there was something else, a lightness he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. When Hope emerged from her room 20 minutes later, Isaac found himself momentarily speechless. She had changed into a simple blue dress, likely borrowed from Mrs. Collins before their flight, and arranged her chestnut hair in a more formal style. Without the constant vigilance and fear that had marked her features during their journey, she looked younger, almost radiant. You clean up well, Miss Randall, he managed finally, offering his arm. As do you, Mr. Fletcher, she replied with a smile, taking the proffered arm. The hotel dining room was busy but not crowded, filled with the murmur of conversation and the clink of cutlery. They were shown to a small table near a window overlooking the street, where the lamps were just being lit as evening descended. Over a meal that seemed luxurious after days of trail cooking, they talked not of Thornton or the investigation, but of simpler, more personal matters, Hope's childhood in Boston, Isaac's early years on a small farm in Missouri before the call of the open range drew him west. What will you do now? Hope asked as they lingered over coffee. After the Rangers have concluded their business with us. It was the question Isaac had been pondering since their arrival in Austin. 2 weeks ago the answer would have been simple, return to the trail, to the solitary life he'd chosen. Now looking at the woman across the table, that life seemed oddly empty. I'm not entirely sure, he admitted. The trail drive was my plan, but plans change. He met her gaze directly. What about you? Will you return to Boston? Hope considered the question thoughtfully. There's not much left for me there. The teaching position I left has surely been filled by now. She traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. Perhaps I'll look for a new position. There must be schools in need of teachers, even here in Texas. I imagine there are, Isaac agreed, thinking of the many small settlements he'd passed through, places where education was valued but qualified teachers were scarce. A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Outside, the street lamps cast pools of golden light on the boardwalks as evening deepened into night. Hope, Isaac said finally, using her given name deliberately. These past days have been unlike anything I expected when I rode into Coyote Springs. She smiled at that. I think that's something of an understatement. Yes, well, he continued, finding himself uncharacteristically hesitant. What I mean to say is that they've changed something in me. Something I thought was fixed, permanent. Hope's expression softened. Your belief that the frontier demands isolation, that connections are dangerous. Exactly that, Isaac confirmed, impressed by her perception. For 2 years I've lived by that creed. It seemed the only way to survive out here. He paused, gathering his thoughts, but watching you risk everything for your sister, seeing Mrs. Collins ride out in the night to find Harker, witnessing how people came together to help us. It's made me question that belief. And what have you concluded? Hope asked softly. Isaac reached across the table, taking her hand in his. That perhaps the frontier isn't just about surviving alone. Maybe it's also about finding people worth trusting, worth protecting, worth living for. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Hope's fingers tightened around his, her eyes bright with emotion. Isaac, she began, but whatever she intended to say was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger at their table, Mr. Fletcher. Miss Randall, the young man in a ranger's uniform, looked between them. Captain Reed sends his compliments and requests your presence at headquarters tomorrow morning at 9. The rangers dispatched to Coyote Springs have telegraphed their arrival and initial findings. Isaac acknowledged the message, and the young man departed with a polite nod. The interruption had broken the moment, but as Isaac turned back to Hope, he found her still watching him with a warmth that kindled something deep within his chest. "It seems our business with the Rangers isn't quite finished," he observed. "No," Hope agreed, "but perhaps when it is," she left the thought unfinished, yet the promise in her eyes was unmistakable. They walked back to their rooms in a silence charged with new awareness, stopping in the hallway between their doors. For a moment neither moved, the air between them thick with words unsaid. "Good night, Isaac," Hope finally whispered, reaching up to touch his cheek gently. "Thank you for today, for everything." "Good night, Hope," he replied, covering her hand with his own for a brief moment before releasing it. As she disappeared into her room, Isaac stood in the hallway, a strange mixture of emotions washing through him. Anticipation, hope, uncertainty, and underlying it all, a growing certainty that whatever path lay ahead, it would be one they traveled together. The next morning brought news that simultaneously concluded one chapter and opened another. Captain Reed received them in his office, his expression grave but satisfied. "The Rangers arrived in Coyote Springs late last night," he informed them. "Dr. Thornton was apprehended without incident. It seems he was preparing to flee, with considerable funds and documents in his possession." "And Sheriff Myers?" Hope asked. The captain's expression darkened. "Myers resisted arrest. There was an exchange of gunfire. He was wounded but will survive to face trial." Isaac and Hope exchanged glances, absorbing this development. "There's more," Reed continued. "Based on documents found in Thornton's possession and testimony from his household staff, we believe his activities may have claimed more victims than we initially thought, possibly dozens across several states." Hope paled at this revelation, her hand instinctively seeking Isaac's. He clasped it firmly, offering silent support. "The investigation will continue for some time," the captain explained. "We'll need detailed statements from both of you, and you'll likely be called to testify once the trials begin. That could be months from now." "We understand," Isaac assured him. "We'll provide whatever assistance is needed." After completing their formal statements, a process that consumed much of the day, they emerged from the Rangers' headquarters into the bright afternoon sunshine. The weight of the past months of Hope's quest for justice and Isaac's journey from solitude to connection seemed to lift slightly with each step they took away from the building. "It's over," Hope said softly as they walked. "After all this time, Hannah will have justice." Isaac squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, though I suspect the captain is right about the investigation continuing. Thornton's reach seems to have been wider than anyone realized." Hope nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I never anticipated how far it would go when I began looking into Hannah's death. I just knew I couldn't let it remain unanswered." She glanced up at him. "I never expected to find allies along the way either. Particularly not a suspicious cowhand who followed you to a doctor's house at midnight," Isaac suggested with a hint of a smile. "Particularly not him," Hope agreed, returning his smile, "though I'm extraordinarily grateful he did." They continued walking, no particular destination in mind. The streets of Austin bustled around them, wagons rolling past, pedestrians hurrying on various errands, the ordinary life of the city continuing undisturbed by the momentous changes in their personal worlds. "The captain mentioned we might be needed for testimony months from now," Isaac observed. "That leaves the question of what to do in the meantime." Hope stopped walking, turning to face him directly. "I've been thinking about that. There's a town called Willow Creek about 50 miles west of here. I inquired at the education office this morning. They're in need of a teacher for their school." "Willow Creek," Isaac repeated, the name unfamiliar to him. "Is it a nice town?" "From what I was told, yes, small but growing. They have a new schoolhouse but no one qualified to teach in it." She hesitated, then added, "They're also situated near several ranches that might be hiring experienced hands." The implication was clear, a possibility of both of them finding a place in this new community, a fresh start away from the shadows of Coyote Springs and the memories of Boston. "It sounds promising," Isaac said, watching her face carefully, for both of us. Hope's eyes held his, a question in their depths. Isaac, when you spoke last night of finding people worth trusting, worth protecting. Worth living for, he completed softly. I meant every word. Then perhaps Willow Creek could be where we both start anew, she suggested, her voice carrying a hope that matched her name. Not just as teacher and cowhand, but as more. Isaac reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I'd like that, he said simply, very much. The moment stretched between them, filled with promise. Then, with a courage born of everything they'd faced together, Isaac leaned down and kissed her, gently at first, then with growing certainty as she responded, her hands coming to rest against his chest. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Isaac kept her close, unwilling to break the connection that had grown between them against all odds. Willow Creek it is, then, he murmured. Though I should warn you, I've never been particularly good at sitting still. The open range has a way of calling. Hope smiled up at him, her eyes bright with understanding and affection. Then we'll find a way to answer that call together. The frontier is vast enough for both a schoolteacher and a cowboy to find their place in it. She paused, then added softly, side by side. In that moment, standing on an Austin street with the woman who had upended every certainty in his life, Isaac Fletcher knew he had found something he'd never thought to seek on the frontier, not just survival, but a reason to truly live. The solitary trail he'd planned to ride had forked unexpectedly, offering a new path forward, one where trust wasn't a liability but a strength, where connection didn't weaken but fortified. Side by side, he agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. 3 months later, as autumn painted the hills around Willow Creek in gold and crimson, Isaac stood on the porch of a small house at the edge of town. Inside, Hope was conducting an impromptu reading lesson for several neighborhood children, her voice carrying through the open windows as she guided them through a passage from Treasure Island. The house wasn't much, 2 rooms with a lean-to kitchen added on, but it was theirs, purchased with the combined savings of a schoolteacher's salary and a ranch hand's wages from the R spread 3 miles outside town. The wedding band on Isaac's finger still felt new, though he and Hope had been married for nearly 2 months now, in a simple ceremony attended by the townsfolk who had welcomed them warmly into their community. Life had settled into a rhythm that would have seemed impossible to Isaac just 6 months earlier. Each morning, he rode out to the R, where his experience and quiet competence had quickly earned him a position of respect. Each evening, he returned to Hope and their growing home, often bringing news from the ranch or items requested by neighbors in town. Word had reached them the previous week that Dr. Thornton's trial had begun in Austin, with Sheriff Myers awaiting his own day in court. The Rangers had uncovered evidence linking the doctor to suspicious deaths in 5 states, a revelation that had made newspaper headlines across the territory. Hope had received a letter from Captain Reed, informing them they would likely be called to testify within the month. The prospect of returning to Austin, of facing Thornton in court, had brought back some of the tension Hope had carried during her long investigation. Yet Isaac had noticed that the news affected her differently now. There was resolve rather than desperation in her response, strength rather than fear. As the children's lesson concluded and they scattered homeward with cheerful goodbyes, Isaac entered the house to find Hope organizing the books she'd used for the day's teaching. She looked up at his entrance, her face brightening in a way that still amazed him. "How was your day?" she asked, setting aside her work to greet him properly. "Good," he replied, kissing her softly. "Johnson's talking about expanding the herd next spring. Says he might need a foreman to oversee the new pasture." Hope's eyes widened. "A foreman, Isaac, that's wonderful." He nodded, allowing himself a moment of pride. It would mean more responsibility, but also more regular hours. Less time on the range during calving season. More time at home, Hope observed, understanding the implications immediately. "That too," Isaac agreed with a smile. He hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about Captain Reed's letter. About returning to Austin for the trial." Hope's expression grew more serious. "So have I. It's strange to think of seeing Thornton again after everything." "Are you ready for it?" Isaac asked gently. Hope considered the question, her gaze drifting to the small framed photograph of Hannah that sat on their modest mantelpiece. "Yes," she said finally. "I am, not just for Hannah's sake now, but for all the others who didn't have someone to speak for them." Isaac nodded, proud of the strength he saw in her. "We'll face it together," he promised, "and then we'll come back here to our home." "Our home," Hope repeated, the words carrying a weight of meaning that encompassed far more than the physical structure around them. She stepped closer, wrapping her arms around his waist. Sometimes I still can't believe how everything changed because you saw me sneaking into a doctor's house and decided to follow. Isaac laughed softly, holding her close. Best decision I ever made, even if it seemed like madness at the time. Outside, the sun was setting over the hills of their new home, painting the sky in the brilliant colors that had once reminded Isaac of the loneliness of the trail. Now, with hope in his arms and their future unfolding before them, those same colors spoke instead of possibility, of beauty best appreciated when shared, of horizons best faced side by side. The frontier had not changed, it remained as vast and challenging as ever, demanding strength and resilience from those who chose to make their lives within its embrace. But Isaac had changed, discovering that true strength could be found not in isolation, but in connection. Not in suspicion, but in trust, not in surviving alone, but in building a life together. As twilight deepened into evening, Isaac and Hope remained in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that whatever trials still awaited them, in Austin's courtrooms or on the expanding frontier, they would face them as they had faced everything since that fateful night in Coyote Springs. Together, their love a shelter more enduring than any walls, their shared journey a home that would follow them wherever the trail might lead.